Hello and welcome back to another update where I cover the latest developments throughout the front line in the Russo-Ukrainian war. It is your host Weep Union, and in this one there are significant developments in the eastern section of the front line as Russians continue their offensive operations within Toretsk in the Pokrovsk section of the front line to the southwest of the city, in the northern and southern flanks of Kurakhove, as well as within the city itself. In all of these areas, Russians have made some developments and advancing across these areas of the front line. To the south of Kurakhove, the Russians have managed to capture the remaining parts of the fortified positions near Vyshneve, clearing the last remaining fortified stronghold before the settlement of Yantarne, which includes a fortified position there as well. After which there is an open road all the way towards Ulakli, where the Russians can advance along the river line, where they have secured the southern bank of the river line. At the same time, with the Russian capture of the fortified positions south of Kurakhove, a significant portion of it, they have been able to advance towards the industrial area from multiple directions, from the southern and eastern direction, advancing further within the city itself, capturing the garage area and parking space, to which they are now advancing further and further along the fortified positions of the Ukrainians here south of Kurakhove to move towards the industrial area from the southern direction, where they've already gained a foothold within it. The Russians are here looking to quickly squeeze out the Ukrainian forces from the remaining parts of the city. The Russians are also advancing in the northern flank through Shevchenko, where they've managed to capture the eastern parts and the central parts of the settlement, leaving only the western parts remaining under Ukrainian hands. And from this we see that the Ukrainians are mainly located along the fortified positions north of the settlement. With the capture of Shevchenko, the Russians would be able to flank the Ukrainian positions towards the fortified area west of Dashne, combining that with an assault through Yantarne and up towards the fortified positions from the southern direction as well. It will encircle Dashne and the remaining parts of Kurakhove. Dashne itself, located west of Kurakhove, includes a few residential buildings, a hospital, and some administrative buildings. There's nothing significant besides the fortified positions south of Dashne, to which the Russians can bypass those through fighting near Shevchenko and Yantarne along the riverline, the Sukhyeli riverline. Russians are here advancing on the north and southern flanks of Kurakhove as well as within the city itself. Further north, the Russians have captured the remaining parts of Novoyelisavetivka, gaining full control over the settlement, and fighting continues over the fortified positions north of the settlement as the Russians move onwards towards Nadiivka and the fortified positions all the way through to the Dnipro region. The Russians have also managed to capture the settlement of Vovchenka here northwest of Vyshneve as they advance further towards the main road between Pokrovsk here in the east and all the way to the west towards the city of Zaporizhia. To the east, the Russians have restarted advances directly towards Pokrovsk, where they have advanced along the main railways, capturing a fortified position of the Ukrainians and fighting over a secondary one along the riverline of Selydove, as well as the railways directly towards Pokrovsk. The Russians have also crossed the Stolonye River north of Dashensk, but have captured a massive fortified position of the Ukrainians along the E50 highway, and have also managed to capture several lines of defense of the Ukrainians northeast of the Selene, encircling the Ukrainian forces within Selene in an operational encirclement with the capture over the fortified positions north of Dashensk, and fighting has also entered into the settlement of Lysivka from the western direction. So several significant developments with this crossing over the northern bank of the riverline as Russians advance towards Pokrovsk and are collapsing the first line of defense of the Ukrainians south of Pokrovsk. With the capture of settlements such as Selene, Lysivka, and Sukhyar, the Russians would have a few fortified positions ahead of Mirnorod to the northeast, no comprehensive line there, and to the west they would have a few fortified positions between them and Pokrovsk itself. Directly to the north they would have a comprehensive defensive line south of Pokrovsk, which includes anti-tank ditches, firing positions, and so on. So this is the strongest defensive line of the Ukrainians remaining here southeast of Pokrovsk. In the southwestern direction, there's no significant defensive lines, and to the southeast, the road to Mirnorod is almost completely open. So we see significant developments taking place ahead of the Battle of Pokrovsk itself. to which the Russians will start a siege of the city by fighting over the roads to the west of the city, both the ones going to Zaporizhia, but also the ones going towards the city of Dnipro itself to the northwest, as well as fighting taking place in the eastern direction, where the Russians have expanded their offensive operations towards Pokrovsk by entering Vovchenka following the capture of the fortified positions, and the forest line south of it. The Russians have entered into Vovchenka for the first time. They've captured some fortified positions in the southern outskirts of the settlement, gained control over the southern parts of it, and fighting is taking place on the western outskirts and towards the fortified positions in the northern parts of the settlement, as the Russians are looking to gain full control of it, then fight over the high ground located south of Vovchenka, securing the choke point here northwest of Novoalexandrivka, and starting a battle towards the intersection here in between Pokrovsk to the west and Konstantinivka to the northeast. This will completely isolate Pokrovsk from any major cities, with only one single highway remaining to resupply the city going through the northern direction, and is a large way around the direct roads that are connected between Konstantinivka and Pokrovsk, as well as Dnipro, Zaporizhia to Pokrovsk. Instead, they'll have to go a long way around. What we can see from the Battle of Pokrovsk is that with these new advances, the Russians have restarted their offensive operations towards the city to go directly towards it at the same time as they fight towards the western flank, both entering the Dnipropetrovsk region, but also hitting the supply roads in and out of the Dnipropetrovsk region, going through to Zaporizhia and Dnipro city. Both of these highways are significant in terms of resupplying the city. If both are cut off, it will only be a matter of time before Pokrovsk itself falls into Russian hands. If the intersection to the east is also cut off, then the situation would be critical, and if the Russians then gain a operational or full encirclement of the city, the entire situation for the Ukrainians in the whole Donetsk region would become critical. And the Russians have started the operation to achieve exactly that. In the direction of Toretsk itself, the Russians have managed to advance in the northern parts of the city. The Russians are looking to gain full control over the city, with significant advances taking place following the capture of the waste heap to the southern parts of the city, as well as the industrial zone and the high-rise apartment complex area. The Russians are now at the outskirts of Krimske and advancing towards the heights in the northern parts of the city to gain full control of it. There's also attempts by the Russians to reach Shcherbinivka, the fortified positions south of Toretsk, and generally gain full control over the entire area. The Russians are launching several offensive operations at the same time. The current priority of the Russian forces is to gain full control over Velika Novosilka, Kurakhove, and Pokrovsk in the southern parts of the Donetsk region, following which they'll begin the siege of Konstantinivka, Druskivka, Kramatorsk, and Slovyansk in the central parts of the Donetsk region, where the main push will come from the Pokrovsk direction, but the main attention will switch from the Pokrovsk direction directly following the fall of the city towards the Toretsk direction and Chasiv Yar direction to force the Ukrainians to relocate and allocate forces and resources to the defense of the Slovyansk-Konstantinivka line. This will free up the Russian forces in the Pokrovsk direction to advance further to flank this defensive position and defensive line. This will lead to a limits of the supplies that can be sent in and out. The more Ukrainian soldiers there are present, the more difficult the situation will become with limited supplies. It could also easily be a bait and switch operation where the Russians will look to gain full control over Pokrovsk. Following the capture of it, they'll allocate a large force to push towards the Konstantinivka, Kramatorsk, Slovyansk line to siege it. Once the Ukrainian forces relocate their forces to that direction, the Russians will then start an offensive operation in the western direction towards Dnipro or Zaporizhia, hitting the less defended areas with little fortified positions and more open areas, rather than sieging a heavily fortified high ground defensive line that has been prepared over many years. In either case, the fall of Pokrovsk will mark as one of the most decisive battles of the war. It is comparable to, or even beats, the Battle of Bakhmut, as the Battle of Bakhmut was a turning point from which the Russians regained the initiative and started their offensive operations. Pokrovsk will be the decisive point that solidifies their victory in the war in Ukraine. The Ukrainians' best bet is to somehow turn the siege of the Sloviansk-Konstantinivka line or the city of Pokrovsk into some sort of meat grinder for the Russians, where they end up expending a lot of their forces to little to no gains. But so far we have seen evidence of the opposite, where the Russians with their superior firepower are able to inflict more casualties on the Ukrainians, and this makes it unsustainable for Ukraine to continue the war efforts, and that is why a lot of Western countries has lost faith in their ability to regain control over their borders, and that is why the Ukrainians are being pushed for a peace settlement now. Although I personally advocated for it summer 2023, as soon as it was obvious that the Ukrainian summer offensive was going to become a failure, it was clear that at that point the Ukrainians would have their best opportunity to negotiate for peace there. Since then, it has only become worse, and it will continue becoming worse the more time passes by, as the Russians significantly has the upper hand as it stands right now, and the Ukrainians are unable to turn the tide. And that's going to be all for this update. Thank you for watching. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, check out my Patreon and YouTube membership for additional content. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.